The NBA draft is just a day away, but there are some under-the-radar names you really need to know, including draft prospects like Baylor Scheierman and Jaylen Tyson. We've also got trade targets like Mitchell Robinson and two others to keep an eye on. We got you covered here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday. Tomorrow is the NBA draft. We got some names you absolutely need to keep an eye on. Draft targets, trade targets, and then we also have a James Borrego update as well. So that's a plan for today's show. We're going to do draft first, then trades. We'll get into free agency a little bit later in the week. Tomorrow is the draft, and I've got a massive show planned for you with everything you need to know to get caught up and be ready for the Pelicans draft night. And then Thursday show, all about who they pick. We're going to break that down in a live episode with some bonus stuff on Locked On Pelicans. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast, and on YouTube as well, where there's over 10,000 Pelicans fans. Today and tomorrow, we got some things you can only get as part of the Locked On Podcast Network as well, and I think that's important too. So draft, because that's the most pressing thing. The Pelicans seem locked into Yves Missi. And a big man makes sense in terms of fit. That's the starting center out of Baylor. I, however, don't love him. Too raw on him, and much more on him tomorrow. But a big man makes sense. But some other names to keep an eye on that aren't big men are Baylor Scheierman out of Creighton and Jaylen Tyson out of Cal. Scheierman in particular seems to be gaining a lot of traction in the draft and going up some draft boards, and draft experts that I really trust seem to love this guy. He's a wing, a senior, so a little bit older, and that's one of the biggest knocks on him. But at 6'6" with a 6'8" wingspan, he's got decent size, and he's also a knockdown shooter. Let's hear what the Locked On College Basketball podcast has to say about Baylor Scheierman.
Baylor Scheierman, Creighton. He's one of the best shooters in the draft, looking to make his mark, but he's got more than that to offer. I'm Isaac Shade from Locked On College Basketball. Scheierman's 23 years old. He's a 6'7", 205-pound left-handed shooting guard small forward. He really took things to the next level last year for Creighton, 18.5 points, 9 boards, and 3.5 assists. Combine that with his ability to shoot 38% on 8.3 attempts, and he's an intriguing look. Unanimous first-team All-Big East last year. Teams need shooting, and Baylor Scheierman's got it. Plus, his quick release and high release will allow him to get it off at the NBA level. But even when the shot's not falling, his facilitation and rebounding will allow him to contribute. His length is adequate, but his size and strength are there. His athleticism is lacking, so defending will be difficult, but Luka's out here making it. Give me Sam Hauser as a comp. For more on Baylor Scheierman and all things college basketball, follow and subscribe to Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts.
All right, see, I told you can't get stuff like that anywhere else because they're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Look, what I love about Baylor Scheierman is he fits a lot of my draft philosophy for the Pelicans right now. And if you're an everydayer or you've been listening for a while, sometimes you just want to draft good basketball players. And I want to go back a year to Brandon Podziemski. This was a guy that I really liked in this draft. Older, just does a lot of things right. And when you watch him play, right, maybe the analytics don't jump out at you, but you watch him play and you're like, that dude's gonna contribute. Like that dude is a gamer in the NBA and is gonna be able to contribute in some capacity. And Baylor Scheierman reminds me of him, like a bigger version of him. You know, the knock on him is he's older. He'll be 24 next season. That's basically ancient in the NBA draft. But sometimes you just need dudes who are going to make things work, and Scheierman is that kind of guy. One of the better shooters in the draft, 18.5 points per game, 38.1% on over 8 attempts from 3, 9 rebounds, and almost 4 assists. This is a dude who can be a movement shooter, can work off ball, but is also going to give you rebounding from that wing backcourt position that he's going to play. Not a great athlete, but you don't need him leading the team. This is a guy who's coming off of the bench on this team. Just draft someone who's going to help you immediately. And the fact that he is a little bit of a playmaker, more than just a shooter, right? Has some pick and roll skills, just knows what he's doing and is at least like an effortful defender. Something says just draft those guys. Don't overthink it. You can take Misi, who has a higher ceiling here, yes, but does that do us any good right now? Does that do this team any good right now if they're not going to contribute for 3 or 4 years at that level? And again, more on Misi tomorrow, because that's right now the feeling of who the Pelicans are going to take. So this guy's not elite. Scheierman's not elite at anything other than shooting, but I'll take that, and he'll be able to get on the court and contribute in other ways. Another name that I've seen draft experts pretty excited about, and by the way, Scheierman and Jaylen Tyson, who we're going to talk about here, both worked out for the team. That's worth keeping in mind. Jaylen Tyson out of Cal is a name that's come up again and again. Not as high on him as, say, Scheierman, but there's a lot to like. Let's hear what Locked On College Basketball has to say.
Cal wing Jaylen Tyson is among the best shot makers in this draft class. I'm Andy Patton, the host of the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Tyson is a 6'6" wing who exploded as a 20-point-per-game scorer last year for Mark Madison at Cal after a productive season the year prior at Texas Tech. Tyson's ability to score from just about everywhere on the floor, as well as his crafty passing and overall versatility, should make him an NBA role player from day one, with the upside to be a legit starting shooting guard at the next level. For more on Jaylen Tyson, Cal, and all things college basketball, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts.
All right. So more of those type of clips, by the way, in tomorrow's show. We're going to run down a bunch of the draft prospects that we'd like the Pelicans to take or that are maybe going to be in consideration for the pick too, but that's pretty cool, unique. Again, you can't get that anywhere else. This is why we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Jaylen Tyson out of Cal, 6'5", 6'6", with a 6'8" wingspan, not as old as Scheierman, but a junior, 19.6 points per game, 36% from three on over 4 attempts per game, 6.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists here. You know, what's interesting about him is at Cal, he was basically running their offense, a super high usage guy, and he thrived in that. Not everybody is capable of doing that, and I do think that says something about him. And he's a shooter, and that's what you want on this team, more shooting. We've talked about that a lot, particularly with the way the Celtics won the title. He can do it off the catch. He can shoot off the dribble, which is a skill the Pelicans need too. And that works. He has good size. You see him post up a lot and backing down smaller defenders, hopefully being able to draw a double team too. So that, I think, is what you look for. He can defend multiple positions with his athleticism. It's a guy that's worked out for New Orleans, and a name that, look, if all the bigs are gone, it's just Misi there, and maybe the Pelicans don't like him that much, though that's not true. Maybe they go in a different direction, and I think this draft really might not go according to a lot of the mock drafts and predictions out there. So I'm pretty excited to see, you know, who's available at 21 for the Pelicans, because while we seemed locked into a big earlier, here are some other names to really keep an eye on if the Pelicans just go, we need someone who can help right now. Maybe the big men available. I don't think Ware's going to be there. I don't think Edey's going to be there. I don't think Holmes is going to be there. Holmes II is going to be there. You've got to maybe go in a different direction. These are two names you've got to keep an eye on. Another name to maybe keep an eye on as the Pelicans look for a starting center, particularly if they don't draft one. Mitchell Robinson, Chalmette boy here. Could he be the starting center next season for the New Orleans Pelicans? Potentially, but I don't think it's the direction that they should go in. I'll explain why. And there's 2 other trade targets that they should potentially look to get instead. That's coming up here next. The names you need to know in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. You probably don't either. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Again, a boost and a bonus daily for anybody. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. It's the draft. We're going to have a massive draft show for you tomorrow. Later in the week, I'm trying to figure out exactly. I've had this whole week planned out for a little bit, and then something came up that I've got like a super secret trade target for you that no one else I think is going to be talking about. We're going to look at that later in the week here. I'm not going to spoil it for you right now. You've just got to subscribe and make sure you listen because you're not going to want to miss this episode at all. And I think it's more realistic than you might think. That's coming up later, probably after the draft, maybe on the Friday show of Locked On Pelicans. See if you can guess it. Let me know. It's not someone we've talked about before. A name we're going to talk about right now, though, is Mitchell Robinson. Oh, by the way, your second listen, Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson. I'm seeing him later after I record this. Awesome dude, covering everything black and gold. Make sure they are your second listen today. Mitchell Robinson from Chalmette. Oh my goodness. He's got a nickname that I had no idea, and I kind of love it. Hold on. Okay, that's the reason. His nickname, according to Basketball Reference, is the Block Ness Monster. Like, sign me up for something like that. That's fantastic. You know, the Knicks are looking to bring back Isaiah Hartenstein, and maybe Mitchell Robinson, who's been very, very injured for them, doesn't fit into the future plans. The Pelicans need a starting center. Jonas Valanciunas isn't coming back. And like his house is for sale, I believe. Like that's how not coming back, even if maybe the Pelicans wanted him, that we're at with all of that. Mitchell Robinson could be available, isn't on a horrible contract, but more on that in a second. It's going to pay him $14.318 million next year, $13 million in the second year. That's the final year of the deal. You know, as a cheap starting center option who's had some productivity as a player before, maybe that's the direction that they want to go in. You know, but I think there's some issues with that. Local guy too from Chalmette, that sounds great. But when you look at him, you know, really his production has dropped over the past couple of years. And a big part of that is he's just not been healthy. Just 31 games this season, 59 games the year before, 72 in 2021-22, that's good. But 31 in the COVID shortened season. Third in the season after COVID, 61 in the COVID season, 66 before. It's not a ton of games, and that's not great. And when you look at his production for the money, I just don't love him as a player. Like if you got him for less than what he's making, yeah, I think it's fine. But here's what it kind of comes down to, right? You know, one, he's injury prone. Can you risk something like that? He has some productivity. He's going to give you points and rebounds, and he definitely is a very, very, very good offensive rebounder, significantly better than he is as a defensive rebounder. But he's never taken 1-3 in his career, and he's a horrific free throw shooter. This is a guy whose career free throw numbers are 51.8%. He shot 40.9% from the free throw line last season. You know, given his style of play and that he can't really defend a ton on the perimeter, there is some rim protection there, though, for him. 2.8 blocks per game for his career, right? So that's the per 36-minute numbers for everything. For his career, he averages 0.7. But I mean, if you were to play him more, maybe there's more blocks. He gives you the rim protection. But I just don't love everything else. And here's the thing, right? He's a worse player than Jonas Valanciunas is. Worse player than Jonas Valanciunas. If Willie Green didn't play Jonas, like why would you spend assets acquiring a worse version of Jonas Valanciunas that Willie Green likely won't play? That just doesn't seem like what you want to do. So I get the appeal. They need to start somebody at center. I just think Drummond, other ways you could go about it that are cheaper, that are going to give you similar production that, you know, then if Willie Green doesn't play, you haven't like invested assets in them and wasted those sorts of things. You know, two names really. One's a backup big, one's not, that I think you can keep an eye on though as trade targets here. One is Goga Bitadze out of Orlando. This is a backup big man on a very cheap deal. And I think that is something that is worth keeping an eye on here, that if you just need a cheap option that doesn't kill your salary, that you probably don't need to give too much up. He's only going to make $2 million next season. is maybe something that you could keep an eye on. It's a team option that's likely going to get picked up, right? That's so cheap. He started 33 games last season in place of Wendell Carter for the Orlando Magic and was decent during that time. His per game numbers don't look great. 5 points, 4.6 rebounds, and he doesn't really shoot threes, or he's not a good three-point shooter, even if he takes them on occasion. But for a cheap backup big option or someone you could throw in as a starter who has some experience with that, he started 55 games in his career. I think you do somewhat worse. Per 36 minutes, he averaged 11.7 points, 10.8 rebounds, and 3 assists. He keeps the ball moving, at least. And I don't think you'd need to give up an absolute ton to go and get him. I don't think that is the center that Orlando would like to trade. I think they wouldn't mind keeping him just because he is so cheap. So Wendell Carter Jr. is maybe the guy that you want to go after, but he makes more money. And I think the Pelicans, as I've said before, maybe just need to go cheap on the center position. And that's kind of the move here. And so you need to give up more assets for Wendell Carter Jr. But I do think you could do worse. I don't think, Bataze is a difference maker in the slightest, right? Like, this isn't someone that necessarily massively upgrades you, but if you're looking for a move that the Pelicans might make, yeah, that's one that kind of checks out and makes sense, and you could totally see it happening because, like, why not? There's no reason not to take a chance on a guy like that can at least give you what you need, and you don't need to invest too much into it. It's kind of the opposite of Mitchell Robinson, I think, here. Another name that I think we should keep an eye on just for some depth, and this is more of the wing small forward position, and that's Deni Avdija from the Washington Wizards here. He had a bit of a breakout season last year. This is someone who, having been a former lottery pick, wasn't playing particularly great, but went from 9.2 points per game to 14.7 while starting 75 games last season. And he finally broke out as a three-point shooter. 37.4% when previous his best had been 31.7. It's a significant jump. Is that actually real or not? There's certainly not the volume of attempts and the sample size to truly know. He took 235 three-pointers last season. You look for a minimum of like 500 to be like, okay, that's the range of where like we trust this guy's shooting or not. So he's below that threshold right now, which makes him a little bit of a risk. But as the Wizards are going through a bit of a rebuild, likely taking Alex Sarr with the second overall pick, the guy that you can kind of build around, their best move is to acquire more assets and kind of blow that team up that they held on for way too long, basically trading Bradley Beal for pennies on the dollar. So if they're looking to just make more moves, you can trade a protected first-round pick to the Wizards for Deni here. And I do think that is an option for New Orleans. If there is a Brandon Ingram trade, you want some more wing depth because, look, that you always want that sort of thing. Is this maybe the move? He would like to be a starter. I don't really see him as a starter on this team. And I don't think he's a guy that would make like a massive impact. Like, this is not the type of player that unlocks this team. There's very few guys out there that would. But I do think that as like a throw-in or part of a 3-team deal, you can get a guy like this that gives you some needed wing depth and maybe kind of has that Najee Marshall role on this team going into next season. And I think that's worth kind of keeping in mind here. He's on an extension that's going to look great in a couple of years. It kicks in next season, $15.6 million, but then it declines every season. So when you get to the 2027-2028 season, he's making $11.875 million. That contract, based on his production last year, will look absolutely fantastic. The final 2 years are going to be like incredibly tradable deals. So if there's a way to go and get him, maybe, again, you go cheap on the center position, send out Larry Nance Jr. in a first-round pick for him. I think that's an option that could add some depth to this team that could be pretty needed. So those are the 5 big names I want you to keep an eye on as we hit like a week where trades and things like that get done. I have the super secret trade target that's coming later in the week. We're going to look more at the draft tomorrow and a bit of a Brandon Ingram trade with that too, because it's draft day. We'll play more clips from the other Locked On hosts, including some from like the conferences, but I want to give you more on Khalil Ware, on Kyle Filipowski, some other names that could be available for the Pelicans there, and some surprise names that I do think could end up falling that maybe the Pelicans wouldn't have had some reach on. That's in tomorrow's show. I think this draft's going to be a little bit unexpected, but not too much because I don't think anyone has just kind of a consensus draft board here. So that's the plan for tomorrow. Then we'll go live. Let's get an update on James Borrego. Did not get the Cleveland Cavaliers head coaching job. So is he coming back? What's it mean for this team? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We're going to be live Wednesday night. Moments after the Pelicans make their draft pick, we're going to go live on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page. I'm going to break it all down for you. That'll be the show for Thursday. And then we'll do the bonus part where I answer your questions. Maybe I'll even do that. I'll tease the super secret trade target in that live portion of the show where I'll interact with y'all. So you don't want to miss that. We'll do it soon. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. A little Locked On after dark, if you will. We're going to be up late, maybe on Wednesday, and I am looking forward to hanging out with y'all and getting back to doing the live shows here. Now, for your second listen today, you watching Fox Sports, ESPN, do you just want draft coverage? Do you want to know the biggest stories in sports where people are actually talking about it, not just making jokes, not just ignoring the topics you want to hear or yelling the whole time? Well, Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day. Literally, someone programs it every day, picks the shows to put on there to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube with a free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got an update. The Cleveland Cavaliers are a no-go for James Borrego. The Lakers are no-go for James Borrego either, ruling out kind of two of the options for him. His name had been heavily linked to both of those jobs, and it sounded like at one point he was very close to becoming the Cleveland Cavaliers head coach. Not to be. They're going with Kenny Atkinson, which, to be honest, I think fits but also doesn't fit. I think he'd be a better coach actually on the Pistons because he's pretty good at developing young players. But still, that's a smart move. He's the guy that probably should be a head coach again, at least have one more option. He's going to be the head coach for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that really means for James Borrego right now, the only option left for becoming a head coach is the Detroit Pistons. There's the links with Trajan Langdon. So it sounds like he'll be in the mix for that job as well, but is that really the direction that they want to go, or do they need to get a guy that's, good at developing young talent? Maybe they just want to supercharge their offense around Cade Cunningham, and Borrego would be good with that too. But right now, I would say maybe signs are pointing that he's likely to remain here in New Orleans. And for a guy that was, heavily linked to 3 head coaching jobs this offseason, I think it's a good thing to retain someone like that. I don't think it would have been the end of the world if he had left. But clearly there's people around the league that think very, very highly of him. And that is, again, keep good, smart basketball people in the building. And I like that sort of thing. I do think that, if they retain him, maybe they really then think more about trading Brandon Ingram. But I don't think that's a guarantee at all, as we talked about in yesterday's show. But there definitely need to be some changes in more of that Borrego ball that they wanted to play, but then ultimately abandoned because of a variety of reasons, which, have been extensively covered here and elsewhere. But I like, again, keeping the guy that you thought highly enough to bring in. You need your head coach to, Willie Green, to be receptive to ideas and all of that. And, that's going to make more of a difference, I think, than assistant coaches, than, people leaving the front office. This is a big year for Willie Green, and he needs to show, a lot. So we can, a lot of ink has been spilled about James Borrego, but I don't think that's even close to the most important factor for this team. The most important factor is going to be Zion Williamson. The second most important factor, frankly, is going to be who do they get in return for Brandon Ingram? If he's traded at all. And then the third most important factor is not Borrego. It's still Willie Green and his growth as a coach, which is something that we do need to see this season, right? It starts with the players. If Zion stays healthy again, this team can win. They won 49 games. That's not a bad number. That's a really good number. It's just unfortunate that you are in such a competitive Western Conference and you'll deal with that. But winning 49 games was impressive for this team last year. Do not lose sight of that fact. It might have been a disappointment. It might not have gone exactly how we wanted, but 49 games is an accomplishment. And that number can grow. You can, in theory, run it back, make other significant changes, whether it's the way Willie Green coaches, whether it's a new starting center, which I guess is not running it back. But those are the type of things that are going to be the most important. But it starts with Zion, and then it comes down to Brandon Ingram, whether he's on the team and what his play is going to look like, or, what you trade him for, and then what your next moves from that might be. Do you get a player in return? Do you get picks, which I don't think is the direction they want to go? That's the stuff that's going to matter more than absolutely anything else, right? We've talked a lot about guys they could draft. Maybe, Zach Edey somehow falls to 21. More on him a little bit tomorrow. He won't. I got told early on in the process he got like a promise somewhere high, before the Pelicans pick. I wouldn't say high, but before the Pelicans, he got a promise that kind of ruled him out immediately for New Orleans here, and that makes sense. So, maybe somehow he falls, or, there's a couple other names that I think you could fall to 21. You go, wait, what? Kind of like a Tyrese Maxey situation. Keep that one in mind too. And we'll cover it all tomorrow. Those are the type of things that are going to be impactful, right? Like, we can talk about the draft though, but even if they draft a rookie at 21 who should have gone higher, we looked at Isaiah Collier yesterday. That's not going to be as impactful as Zion, as Willie Green, as whatever happens with Brandon Ingram. Those are the things that we want to focus on and matter. We'll still look at everything else here, but more so than James Borrego. Happy they potentially are going to keep James Borrego. It's not a bad thing, but wasn't going to make as much of a difference as those other things, categories, topics, whatever they are, either way, as the players. That's what we're going to, is going to really change the fortunes of this team. That's why this is, and look, every year since they drafted Anthony Davis has been like the most pivotal offseason for New Orleans. So that's what makes this the most pivotal offseason for New Orleans. So let me know what you think about the names. I said Mitchell Robinson, yes, no. Baylor Scheierman, Jaylen Tyson. Do you like any of those? Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. Big draft show tomorrow. We'll get you set for everything. Live show on Wednesday night as well. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'll see y'all tomorrow.